Right. Again, April 5th, 2 p.m. We will see you there. Have a great time watching this presentation. We're really excited to bring that here with us.
All right.
Thank you all so much for having us back. We're excited to go ahead and get started today. I do hear a little bit of echo, so if you can, please try to mute your microphones, and then we'll go ahead and get started. We are recording, and I think recording is already in progress. And just so you know, you are welcome to turn on your video. You can have it on or off or however you would like to do it. You can use the chat. Some of you have already started saying hello. We're going to be using that to respond some prompts. We will be doing some reflecting. So if you are kind of pen and paper like me, go ahead and find those materials or go ahead and open up a digital document. All of the materials that we're providing today will be provided to you after the workshop. So I don't want anybody to like be furiously trying to write down notes or anything. All of that will be provided to you. And then, yes, the session will be recorded. So we're ready to jump into things. This is inclusive teaching. This is part one of this two-part series. And this part, we're going to focus on two of the most important parts of inclusive teaching and learning experience, which is us as the course facilitators and also our students. So that's kind of the two pieces we're going to be thinking about today. For today, we're going to really be focusing on thinking about inclusive teaching practices, describing their characteristics, identifying the role of faculty in designing those moments, identifying practices for getting to know our students, and we are going to use what's called a practice sharing model. This is something that we talk about a lot when it comes to inclusive teaching and learning. So we wanted to not only tell you about a practice, but show that practice in action. So those are what we're going to be focusing on today. And thank you for that wonderful introduction, RCT team. This is Judith Dutil, and I am Melissa Whaler, and we do focus on these kind of development opportunities for faculty. We have the amazing privilege of talking to faculty all over the world and bringing these very specific kind of professional development opportunities to them. And if you want to know more about us, you can log on to www.oltfaculty.com. Before we jump into too much of the content for today, we would love for you to put in chat the way you prefer your name to be pronounced and any kind of preferred pronouns, and if you would like to share anything else. This is an inclusive teaching practice. That is one reason why I love things like Blackboard Collaborate, because people write their names down. I don't really retain people's names very well, so I appreciate that functionality of Blackboard Collaborate. But in the chat, if you could go ahead and just give us all of those good details, your name, any kind of name pronunciation you prefer, and your preferred pronouns that you would like to share. Thank you so much. And that's going to be filling up our chat, and we're going to keep on keeping on here because I only have you for 60 minutes. In an inclusive teaching and learning space, we're going to model inclusive practices. And one of those inclusive practices is creating multiple ways for people to engage in the session. So one of the things you're going to see are these three icons throughout the presentation. And it's going to be reflecting quietly. Just because we're reflecting quietly does not mean we're not participating. I love reflecting quietly. My gears are always kind of spinning up there. You can also use the chat, which part of the reason to introduce ourselves is to get us used to that functionality. And then you can also go ahead and say, hey, call on me. I want to come on mic and talk things out. So those are different ways to engage, and we like you to engage at your level of comfort. Okay, so let's jump right in here. We're going to do our first big engagement exercise. And the question before us is, if you were asked to define inclusive teaching, what would you say? Go ahead and again, you can think quietly to yourself. You can put it in chat, or if you'd like to raise your hand and come on mic, you can do that too. Okay, I'm starting to see some life happening over in the chat, but if you need a few more moments, that's okay. I love what's happening here because we're talking about the idea of including everyone and having that sense of belonging and that shared sense of purpose. Beautiful. Meeting the needs of all of our students. It is so hard to do that as a faculty member, and yet it is so critical that we do that. So I appreciate you bringing up the tough stuff today. That's exactly right. The idea of community and everybody being in there together. Yeah, togetherness, belonging, those are key words. Considering everybody in our audience, all of our students, that gets back to the question of student needs. I love that. Yeah, doing very practical things like um, making sure everyone's included, taking account of different learning ideas and approaches to learning, asking for very practical things like what pronouns you prefer, how do you prefer to pronounce your name. Um, and the idea that we're motivating all the learners. So we're seeing a lot of those keywords popping up here, and I'm just really appreciating and loving this idea of belongingness and community and relationship building. That's great. Yeah, bringing their whole selves to the classroom, right? I remember as an undergraduate, somebody told me I needed to check myself at the door and not bring my baggage, but that's not realistic. I have to bring my whole self because my whole self has to do the learning. So critical. I love that. And yeah, creating a learning and belonging environment. Yes, that again, that idea of belonging. So many, oh, blown away. So many great things happening here. I knew when I was writing this question in here, I was like, they are going to have so many good things to say about this. I'm so stoked. Okay. So I want to just get us kind of synthesized and summarized on the same page and talk about some of the characteristics of inclusive classrooms. And I love that we talked about kind of philosophically, and then we also talked very practically. But if I am going in and I'm observing somebody who has an inclusive classroom, I'm thinking about what I would see in that space. And I'd probably see different levels of interaction, students interacting, and then students and faculty members interacting. I would see a lot of eager and productive participation happening. And that's that feeling of belongingness, community, connection that we talked about. The idea that there's multiple ways to engage with materials, that whole self being brought in, that we meet the needs of our students. We have resources and support for everybody, and everyone feels like there's something there for them. This acknowledgement of different perspectives. Again, that's that idea of I have to bring in who I am, and I have to learn with where I'm at. And then materials that also reflect not only the students in the classroom, but our institutional community and maybe even the community that we find ourselves in geographically. So all of those are things I would just expect. Now, this is not a comprehensive list. These are just some really key touch points that if you're looking to take inclusivity from a philosophy into a practice, these are some of the things I would start thinking about and reflecting on in my own teaching practice. What does my classroom look like? And I bet you all are sitting there ticking some of these boxes already. So now that we kind of have a similar understanding of what it physically might look like, we're going to talk about the interplay. And in the middle of our circle, where all the circles touch, is inclusivity. And so here we have kind of the four main components of an inclusive classroom. And we could add a couple additional circles, but just again, for simplicity and to focus on the practical aspects of inclusive teaching, we're just going to keep it focused here. And the first two that we're going to talk about this time are the students and the faculty and how those two interplay in an inclusive classroom. Next time, we'll be talking about classroom spaces and materials. So I just want to highlight that this time we're really focusing on the roles of faculty and what we bring into the classroom and how we can help design inclusive spaces. And then the idea of how we invite students and welcome them into the spaces that we've designed and created for them. So stay tuned. Please come back for part 2. There's lots of good stuff happening there too. So let's talk about faculty and inclusivity. And, whenever I'm going to take a deep breath here, because whenever we talk about faculty inclusivity, it can feel like a lot is resting on our shoulders, and it can feel like we are kind of the linchpin in all of these conversations, which we are because, we're kind of at the heart of what happens in a classroom. But I don't want you to feel like there isn't support and resources. This is a good resource coming to these kind of opportunities, leaning on your CTE department liaisons. Those are really good resources. So yes, we are deeply involved in this process, but we're not alone in our involvement. So we can do this, okay? I don't want anybody getting overwhelmed yet. So what's key to thinking about inclusivity from our faculty perspective is that we can't divorce the classroom and the faculty from who we are as human beings. And what that means is that we often interpret what's happening in our classrooms through our experience and our own lens of what has happened to us as students, maybe previous experience in the classrooms, and then of course just our basic understanding of who we are as people. So because we are seeing ourselves and our students through this lens, we need to kind of grapple with what that can bring to a classroom. Both positively, it adds a lot to a classroom when we're our human real selves, but also what maybe we have to consider and adjust for in design. So let's go ahead and just talk about our personal lens. And because we're talking about something personal here, you'll see this is a personal reflective only opportunity, just because I don't want to put anybody on the spot to have these kind of reflection out loud when we're really just thinking about it ourselves. So through our personal lens, we're dealing with a lot of different things that we bring into the classroom. We have a lot of different privileges in some ways, and we also probably are not privileged in other ways depending on our personal lens. So I'll speak for myself. In the classroom, I have an education privilege. That's part of the reason why I'm in the classroom, is because I have additional degrees and experiences that my students don't have. That gives me a privilege. But I'm also, a woman, and so I don't necessarily have the same kind of gender privileges. I teach in the language that is my first language, and so I have a language privilege that some of my students may not have. I also may have a nationality privilege if I'm teaching students in the same geographical country that I'm teaching in. So there's a lot of different things at play here. Sometimes I have certain privileges, but in other times I'm not privileged. And what this personal lens does is it can really kind of flavor what we see as our role in the classroom. I'll take a look at the education, because that's a privilege probably all of us have because we all have advanced degrees. An education privilege, we might start thinking about our experiences through the educational system, positive and negative, and those experiences will absolutely show up in our design. So something to think about in terms of what are your lenses? What are the ways that you personally, as an educator, approach the classroom? And again, it's that part, it's not positive or negative. We just want to reflect and be aware of what is happening in our own personal space as we enter a classroom. In addition to personal pieces, we also have to think about kind of the broad context of ourselves. And again, this is a private reflective moment. First is, what was college life like when maybe we were undergraduates? Maybe for some of us, we went right from a high school experience into a college experience. Maybe some of us are adult learners and continuing education learners. So maybe our college experience looks different. All of those things are really going to impact the way we structure our courses. The other thing we want to think about, and this is one that I know I don't like to think about, is technology advances. The biggest technology advance that was happening when I was an undergraduate is that we got campus email. That is a very different situation than the technology advances of the students entering my classrooms today. So that is also changing the way that I understand and maybe interact with my students. And then lastly is society and politics. Where in the time period that maybe I was raised, there were different things happening. So a good example of this, one of my earliest memories is the my parents sitting around and watching the invasion of Kuwait. And so that really flavored my understanding of what the news media meant, what my nation's role in the geopolitical landscape meant. So it was a very different environment, again, than what we're seeing for our students, and in some ways not different. So you're thinking about, your experiences versus what maybe the experiences are of your students. So again, just a quiet reflective moment. It's hard when we talk about all of this to kind of unpack our own experiences and lenses, but here are some things that you can do, very practical things to help you do that deep dive in those deeper reflections. Just like we did here, consider some of the personal experiential lenses that you bring into the classroom. They are critical, and they bring a lot of very important, essential things into the classroom. And that's why you're in the classroom, because you have that experience and that knowledge and that wealth of examples and real life it, you know, opportunities that you can pull in. But it's also going to show up in ways that maybe we aren't including students who don't share those kind of experiences and lenses. You can attend faculty engagement workshops just like this that give you space and time to think about your own personal experiences that you bring into the classroom. There's lots of campus and community resources out there for you. We can read more on the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning. We can do a self-reflection inventory. I know that one of the things we do is we talk a lot about unpacking privilege in the classroom. And so we have a privilege inventory checklist that we work through with faculty. You can attend inclusivity focused discussions, and you can listen actively during those discussions. All of those things are going to help you do that deep reflective teaching that is the first critical step to having more inclusive spaces. And I think for me, it's really important to start with the personal in the classroom, because it's going to be a lot easier for me to give you very practical tips to help make classrooms more inclusive. But for this moment, I want to focus on you and what you need and all of the good things that you bring to the classroom, and amplifying those through self-reflective teaching practices. So that's a lot. We're going to go ahead and move on to students and inclusivity. So once we have done kind of unpacking of ourselves, which I think it can be really freeing. I've been teaching for a very long time. We'll just leave it at that. And I try to do those kind of deep dives into my teaching experiences at least once a year, usually right before fall semester, because I like to clean the slate with myself and check in with myself. So those experiences can be an opportunity to take a deep breath and really, embrace that part of teaching that isn't so focused on the details. Now we're going to shift our focus slightly to getting to know our students in addition to getting to know ourselves. And we're going to do some more active chatting in this section. I'm just going to give you a heads up there that that's going to happen. So next we want to think about through the lens of my students. So this is very, once we do our self-reflection, then it's time to turn our attention to the students that we are serving. And we want to look at them individually and then kind of in terms of our campus demographics. And what that's going to help us do is it's going to help us, as you all pointed out earlier in the session, to meet the needs of the students in the classroom. But we're not always going to know everything about our students. I think here specifically about our students who maybe are neurodivergent, and how critical it is that we, serve those students, but we may not always know, they may not always know. And so we can't always just ask them. And so we're trying to design experiences by thinking about the individual, but also broadly, how can we broadly invite students into our classroom and make sure they're included? So thinking about things through the lens of our students. And then also, again, this one is maybe not our favorite thing to do, but to think about how different their experiences of college life are when compared to maybe our experiences. And if you've been teaching a while, you probably know that the college life experience for students has also changed, not just since you were a student, but probably over the course of your teaching career. We can certainly see this in microcosm over the past 2 years, where students and all of us have faced rapid changes in the college landscape and how that may be impacting the students and their and how we can work to include them in the classroom. We're also looking at technology advances, and I like to look at technology advances of the incoming class of students. What was really popular when they were, really in their formative years? What kind of things were happening in technology? And how might that impact my design decisions? Particularly at the level of how can I maybe learn something new to help include those experiences and show students that I'm invested in them, not just as an idea of a student, but them as people. And then lastly, look at the society and politics. There's a lot of places, a lot of publications that will put out, like, did you know that students who are entering your classroom were not even born when 9/11 happened? There's lots of those kind of floating out there. So there's places you can pull that information from. But just kind of taking a snippet of the last sort of like 18 to 25 years, if you're teaching traditional age students, what was happening during that time and how that may have impacted their understanding of what a college degree means or what learning means. I also like to look at educational policies that were very prominent. I entered the academy right as kind of the first true generation of No Child Left Behind. Students were entering college as well, and so I was seeing the difference and the impact that those educational policies had made on my students, for better and for worse there. So you want to take a look at the students' lens of their experience too. When we talk about getting to know our students kind of on a very practical level, that happens before class. And I've already intimated a little bit of this, that we want to research the incoming students. We want to know what was happening kind of in their ecosphere before they came to our institution. And then we want to consider the demographics of the students specifically that we serve. And that information is usually available through the institution. And what you want to look at there is, you know, look at if you have any information about, veterans, if you serve those populations, first generation college students, second English language speakers. All of those things are really going to help you move from general to the specific. And then the other thing I really like to do is send a welcoming email. Sometimes we call this a welcome email, but I don't think it goes far enough. A welcoming email, in addition to having all the good stuff about, I'm so excited you're going to be in my class this semester. I'm so looking forward to teaching about these topics and doing these projects with you. But in a welcoming email, we're also saying, and this is how you can contact me. And I encourage you to contact me and talk to me before the class starts. That is going to be another way, a foot in the door to get to know our students a little bit better before we even truly meet them in the context of our classroom. So there are so many things we do before the start of class to get to know our students. And so I invite you now to do a practice share with me. What do you folks think about what are other ways we can get to know our students before the first day? What are some great things y'all are already doing to get to know your students before the first day? And you can again think quietly to yourself, come on chat, or you can come on mic. kind of get that broad picture perspective of, what are they doing here? Why are they learning here? Sending out questionnaires and inviting responses. Yes. And questionnaires, I love that. We're going to talk a little bit more about questionnaires because uh, we are going to talk about engaging students in inclusive classrooms in a variety of ways. We want to make sure we're building community in the classroom itself. So that's kind of a public everybody. But then there's these private moments like questionnaires that allow students to get to know us individually and for you to get to know them individually. Yeah. Welcoming email. Thank you. Yes. Introducing ourselves. I don't think we can say enough about how critical it is that we put ourselves out there in an inclusive classroom space, talking about who I am and my background and my interests, and, being able to put myself out there because no one feels welcome. Think about welcoming somebody into your house. Nobody feels welcome if you answer the door and point them inside. No, they want to know that they're here. They're welcome. You want to answer the door and be like, "Hi, here I am. I haven't met you before. Here's my hobbies. Here's what I love to do." So I love that. Welcoming announcements, having an activity to introduce themselves. Yeah. Yes. Yes, and that is so critical. Giving students opportunities to tailor the class to who is in it and why, and that you can only do if you get to know the students and get a sense of what they want to do. Yeah, introduce them, yourself, themselves, goals, majors, why they're taking the class. All of these are really great and ways that we can start to really think about how we're going to welcome and invite students into class by getting to know them first as students and then as humans. And I think that that's really critical. Again, always great. And for those of you who are doing the quiet reflection, thank you for doing those quiet reflections. I don't want to leave you and think you're not in the conversation. You are definitely still here. Yeah, wonderful. So next we're going to that all important first day. And some of us already, because y'all are experts at this, have put out some really great stuff. So doing everyone introductions and including yourself, I think it's something that we spend so much time in the design and development of our classes that we might forget that we're part of those classes. And I've sat in on first day classes where the professor just forgot that they should also do the introduction and not just have us introduce ourselves to students. So everyone introductions. And one example is the example we did at the beginning, tell me how you want me to pronounce your name, any pronouns, and anything else you'd like to share. And we did have somebody share this already, a getting to know you survey. And again, this should be aligned with your teaching practice. If you want to do something that is kind of more specific to the class, then that's a great questionnaire to do. Why are you taking this class? What are your learning goals? What's your major? If you want to kind of slowly open the door to getting to know you, you can ask them about, what are their feelings about education? What are their experiences in education? Those are ways you can slowly open the door. What we probably don't want to do in those first surveys is get too in the weeds of their personal life and experiences. Like all relationships, you want to grow those things over time. So getting to know you can really be specific to the class or maybe a little bit more broad about educational experiences, but always leaving the door open. Is there anything else you'd like me to know? Is always a great addition. Open-ended questions are great additions to those questionnaires. I also love to do welcoming icebreakers. I know when I say icebreakers that everyone kind of maybe groans a little bit, but find something that again aligns to who you are in the classroom, something that you'd be comfortable facilitating. I think icebreakers become kind of groany for everybody because we don't necessarily select something that aligns with something we're comfortable with doing. So do some kind of welcoming icebreaker. It could even be getting groups and discuss, what you want to do in the class or what you're most looking forward to. It can be something kind of, class specific. It doesn't have to be wacky or, anything that you're uncomfortable doing. So, and then lastly, and some of us have already said this one too, is ask about learning goals. You can learn so much from students about their priorities and their past experiences and where they're at right now in their learning journey when you ask them about their learning goals. And I think it also is a good reflection about our maybe expectations for students. Sometimes we think that students, because maybe we were that student who is hyper focused on grades and wants the A at all costs, but maybe their goal for the semester is I'm having a hard time. This isn't necessarily a class that I think I'm particularly good at. And I just want to pass. And knowing that up front and being able to nurture that student and meet them where they are is so critical to making people feel included in the classroom. So some of us already said this, but I want to do a practice share anyway. If you already practice share something you do on the first day, I know there are other good things you do on the first day. So please go ahead and add something else. Again, you can think quietly, go on chat, or raise your hand. You study buddies and study groups and accountability buddies and all these people. I want to start doing that from the first day. So I love that one. Doing name tags. Yeah, having them introduce themselves, something that many people may not know. Absolutely. And I would also say with the icebreakers, especially if you're asking any kind of like question, give people like just a few minutes to maybe write something down, because if they're high anxiety, it's going to be hard for them to come up with something real quick. So give them a few moments and let them write something down on paper so they don't have to think off the top of their head. Um, yeah, something that's making you happy this week. So again, keeping the tone positive, and then you're gonna get to know things about them. I always say, when you introduce yourself, if you have a good recommendation from me, like a good food recommendation or Netflix recommendation, you don't have to give me one, but if you do, and that always lets me know what they're interested in. Like, hey, Dr. Will, I think you should try this out. And it gives me insight into them, and I also get really good recommendations out of it. So 10 out of 10 recommend that. Um, Pairs a student, two truths and a lie, and introduce each other. I love that. Gamification is so critical. And again, it really sets the tone of the class. Doing activities with another student, critical. Again, it sets that idea that we're going to be working together and that we're going to be having these interactions together. Yeah. For an online class, write 3 statements. Yeah, 2 truths and a lie. This is always, again, I love it. And, it lets students set their comfort level. Some people might, go pretty outlandish and get pretty personal, but some people might be like, this is my first semester. And it just lets people opt in at their level of comfort. And I think that that is so critical when we're doing these kind of icebreakers. Again, amazing responses. I knew they would be, just based on our conversation last time. So fantastic. Now we're going to talk about how do we keep the welcoming environment and getting to know our students. How do we keep that going during the semester? And I kind of love that I'm talking to y'all at this point in the semester, because this can be like a real dip point in the semester where you're like, I need to get refreshed and motivated, and I need to get the students refreshed and motivated. So I love that we're going to talk about ways we can continue being um, focused on relationship building with our students and including our students during the class. So dialogues and discussions, making space for students to provide you with, moments to breathe and to talk about what's happening, what's on their mind. And these could be dialogues about the class, that you can say, okay, let's do a check-in, everybody. Where are we at? What's working? What needs fixed? I do a stay, stop, start survey, usually at midterms, where what should I stay doing, stop doing, start doing? And then I usually have them do it for themselves so they can have a reflective moment. What should they stay doing, stop doing, and start doing? Um, and by this point in the semester, I have students who are like, I need to stay doing this homework and I need to stop procrastinating on that last project. So it's a good opportunity for me to intervene and be like, do you need some help with that procrastination? But making space for those kind of dialogues and discussions. And then we mentioned this as like a before the class or even a first day activity, doing kind of like a questionnaire, but keeping that going throughout the semester by doing surveys and polls. These can be short. I like a poll because it's short. Um, how many of us have started the project? Yes or no? Very quick. But I also like surveys too, where we can maybe do a little bit more self-reflecting. And then full circle feedback. So there's a couple different ways you can do full circle feedback. You can do it as um, like as a feedback for an assignment. So you've given a student feedback on a project, then you ask them to respond to that feedback. And that creates a dialogue so you can talk about and contextualize progress. Because one of the things that we don't really get to do a whole lot of is contextualize, well, you were here. And now you are here, you're making these progress to your learning goals, to the learning outcomes for the class. So doing that full circle feedback opens an opportunity for dialogue and to get to know them better as they grow in your classroom. You can also do full circle feedback where they give you feedback about the class and their needs, and then you can kind of say, well, these are the things I've observed, and have that conversation where it's kind of like a 360 review where everyone's kind of engaged in that conversation. And then lastly, do a communications check-in. And normally before the semester starts, I plot out specific points in the semester where I want to do a check-in with my students. Usually that's after the first week, after major projects or midterms, right before finals or a final project, where I'm just saying, hey, I just want to check in with you. Everything okay? Here are some resources in case you haven't used them yet. Please reach out to me. Here's my contact information, my office hours. Again, keeping that welcoming gesture from the very first class going throughout the rest of the semester. So I know you all, I'm going to ask again, practice share. What are other ways you continue to build those relationships and learn about your students throughout the course of the class? Some really great practices coming in over chat. And thank you all to those of you who are reflecting quietly to yourself as well. Um, some good ones. Group activities. Yeah, I love group activities where they have opportunities to, build relationships at different levels of the class because they can build them, in pairs or as small groups or larger groups. And then they can also share that with the rest of the class. I think differentiating group activities is really critical to building those relationships as well. Great. Yep. Observing them. Yeah. I mean, that is such a great insight because there are lots of things that we can design, and I always love to design very conscious moments in my class where I'm building those relationships. But yes, observing and interacting with students, and then taking time to reflect on those observations and interactions, that is critical. So yes, thank you for sharing that. And also playing music during sort of lab time, asking them for requests. You will get to know a lot about your students by having them create like a class playlist. I always think that's a really fun way to kind of invite that, their personality and, what their interests are into the classroom. So I love that. Discussion boards are a great way to have students start to build those relationships and keep building them throughout class. And what I would say about discussion boards, and those of you who are teaching online, or maybe who want to introduce that kind of asynchronous discussion to your class, um, discussion boards are particularly great when you have this like open-ended conversation, and then you bring in that's about the topics and the context. But also don't be afraid to bring in discussion boards that are fun, and that are just meant for community and class building. Our online students need that just as much as our students in the classroom need that. Using games to review, love it, wonderful. um, Ooh, I lost my place in the chat. There we go. And then using the questionnaires, and pulling an item slash content that students provided. Yeah, so having students contribute to the actual materials of the class. We're also going to talk about this again when we talk about part 2, so stay tuned, where you are literally including them in the conversation of course design and scholarship and teaching. Critical. Absolutely love that. um, Using surveys, yes, again, seeking out that feedback, and also approaching it from a place of I want to know and I'm interested in what you have to say. um, and I think that that is so important, because students will give us a lot of really great feedback if they know that we're asking it in earnest and we're going to use it. Just like the rest of us, when I get a survey in my email, if I'm even like, I don't know if they really care about what I'm going to say in this survey, I may not fill it out. But I love that you are really presenting it to them and giving it to them anonymously and allowing them to really express themselves in that survey. And they have probably become comfortable enough with you that they'll do it. Yeah, absolutely. Inviting them to office hours. Yes, 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 yes. I have to say, I think it was maybe last year, um, I was doing a development session kind of like this, and somebody said, I don't have anything else to say about office hours, come or don't. And I was like, I've got so much to say about office hours. So I think I wrote a 4-part blog series about how important office hours are. And I believe that with every fiber of my being, because you're right. That is where you're going to get those informal conversations. You're going to get to know them a little bit more because it's a one-on-one situation. So yes, office hours. Yes, yes, yes. Um, I like asking them their biggest aha moment. Yes, I love that. Getting in those metacognitive practices. If you're looking for a very, short but informative way to do active learning, you can do aha moment for the class. What was my muddiest moment? Yes, and I think that you're absolutely right. It connects to course content, but also personal experiences. Um, because they're going to say things like, well, if it's a chemistry class, well, I remember learning something about this in high school, but it didn't really click until now, and this is why. And then you're going to get a sense of maybe, their progress and journey as a student. So yeah, I can't say enough about those like micro reflection moments. They're easy to design, they're easy to facilitate, and you can learn. It's a big bang for your buck because you can learn a lot about students from them. Love it. Amazing, amazing, you all. I'm so glad, and I love sharing this space with everyone, and I just am blown away by everybody's participation today. It's really fantastic. So we have covered the ground, I would say, of faculty and students when it comes to inclusivity. And next time we're going to talk about classroom materials. So for those of you who are going to join us next time, just kind of getting those wheels turning about what are your thoughts about what an inclusive classroom space looks like, and what do inclusive materials look like, or what could they look like? So just a reminder that that's coming up. I want to take a moment. I'm going to have my own metacognitive moment here with you, because so much of what we do is we talk about the practice, but I want to talk a little bit about unpacking the practice. Here are some ways that when I designed this presentation, that I was going to intentionally model inclusivity, welcoming y'all, using accessible technologies. It's really hard to include people if it's not accessible. Writing those learner-centered outcomes, providing instructions on how to participate and multiple ways to participate. All of those are inclusive practices. I did provide some space for introduction that centers y'all, and you were able to do that in the chat, and that's fantastic. Space and time for quiet reflection. I wish we could do maybe an hour and a half session where we can really expand the space for reflection, but even a minute or two can really be a breath in our day. You'll have probably heard me using inclusive language like y'all or folks. That's intentional. And then practice sharing is one of the key ways you can start to model inclusivity in your class, and you can start doing that today. It does not require anything else. But what practice sharing does, and I hope that you all noticed it, because I noticed it in the chat, we were putting great practices and we were feeling good, like, oh, I do this, like I do this. And so recognizing that you're doing these things, and then other people were like, that's a great idea, oh, I do that too, oh, this is great. So we could see how acknowledging that people aren't blank slates. They come to us with lots of good experiences that we should leverage. It encourages and empowers individuals to share things. And it also encourages accessing prior knowledge, which we know is a really important skill, not only for our students, but for us. I know that my recall, especially over the last 2 years, has really dropped off dramatically. So being able to access prior knowledge is critical to making sure, I'm still able to like have these moments of synthesis. So all of those things are things that we did during this, and they were intentional, but not hard to do. Oh, I went backwards. Please excuse. I'm going to give you all this. This is my workshop toolbox. These are the things that I pulled from when designing the workshop. These are very practical, focused ideas. This is my workshop bookshelf. This is where I'm pulling and synthesizing a lot of these best practices. This is where the evidence for the things I told you lives in these books, and other articles and interactive resources. And again, you'll get copies of all this. So I know I'm going a little quickly here, but it's a lot of text on the screen and it can be overwhelming. So that's the presentation portion, and I wanted to leave at least 10 minutes for a chat. If you want to connect with us, we have all kinds of social media, and you can also email me directly, and I'm happy to put that in the chat too. But I'm going to stop sharing my screen and come on and take any questions or comments or observations or best practices that you want to share with us today. Anything sprang to mind as a great practice, or something they want to try, or questions you have about, well, I do this, is this something that, how can I keep advancing this or keep developing this?
Hi, Melissa. So in my classes, what I do after every single class, I ask them to leave me what I call the love note. And I'm asking them two questions. One is, without looking at your notes, what are the most memorable things? And the two is, which one would you like learn more of or go over again? And based on the feedback, I'm actually adjusting my next class so I can address that. So I start my class with those questions. If there is a one student that has particular question, then I individually meet with them at the end. But if it's more than majority of the class or more than one person, 2 people, then I address it again. I go over, I research if I may find a different way of presenting the same knowledge, but not the one that I presented, because it might have been confusing for them or to them.
That is so great, and I love that practice. And I just want to give you like a shout out and kudos there, because doing that is time intensive and it's labor intensive. And, you know, I think that those are the moments that we need to shout about what faculty do from the rooftop, because that is amazing, that you're just making these adjustments and you're working out how to do those things. And the other thing I really love about that is it's really putting into practice, that you are saying you want feedback, but you're following that up with action. And students probably are seeing that, like, oh, if I say this, she is going to help me with this. And that is, you know, we can say we're inclusive and talk about inclusion, but if we don't move it into practice, it's, you know, it's not really useful. So I love that you've moved that into practice. Thank you for sharing that. That's great. Absolutely. Oh, I
I,
sometimes realize, oh yeah, go right ahead.
Patrick Kane here. I'm actually I was in person. How you doing? So one thing I've done, I teach CIS courses, and I teach like mostly operating system, Linux, Windows, and one way of really humanizes yourself in the classroom. And sometimes I'm doing it on purpose, sometimes I am not. But you celebrate your mistakes. So if something doesn't work right, you know, command gives you an invalid. Those are really profound moments I've found for my students. They immediately go into troubleshooting tech support mode. They want to try to one up the instructor and find out what happened, what went wrong. And it's really a good collaborative experience. And sometimes, hey, I screw up, you know, it's going to happen. And it's the way technology works. And it's a great way of like the classroom like immediately starts laser focusing in on okay, let's try to solve this problem. And it's a great learning moment. So I just wanted to share that with you. Just humanize yourself.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. That is great. And you know, that's kind of one of the things that haunts this whole kind of conversation, is this idea of just being human and humanizing the classroom, and that it's okay to make mistakes. And then having the students kind of rally in that moment, I think is so critical, because that shows them that they're it shows them that that they are comfortable with you to be able to do that. You know, I've observed, oh, I can't even tell you how many classes, but sometimes students will just sit there when somebody's made a mistake and they're just so disengaged, and I can't point that out, you know. And so I think it really does speak to the relationships you're building in the classroom, that students are like, hey, I noticed something, and they're excited to point it out and they're excited to help you. I think that's just so critical. And then on the flip side of just being human and making mistakes, yes, it's part of the inclusive classroom to acknowledge that we can't leave it at the door. We are humans and our students are humans, and we're going to make mistakes, and embracing the learning process that, you know, happens when mistakes get made. I love that. That's fantastic. Yeah, thanks for sharing that out. Um, we have another in chat. I sometimes give my students self-evaluation questions so that they can assess their progress in the class. I love that. You know, our students, I've had this conversation a lot recently because of the conversations around ungrading. And I know that we had this conversation here a month ago about ungrading, but our students are often so much harder on themselves than we are. And they are so in the weeds of their own learning, that they don't see the progress. And so anytime we can help them step back and talk to us about their progress, it's so good and critical. It helps us, but it also really helps them. And it's a skill that they're going to need, because they'll be doing all kinds of assessing of themselves and their progress for the rest of their lives, whether that's in performance evaluations or further education or whatever comes next for them. So I love that you're building those skills and then supporting them through that process. I love it. Yeah. Another comment says, I've recently started to think more about creating inclusive syllabi in the wake of the pandemic. Okay, I think that you have been looking me up. Is that true?
Hi, it's Kevin. No,
Hi,
it's really true. Like I didn't really think so much about a syllabus and
yeah,
inclusive language because syllabi or whatever we call them, learning contracts or whatever, they can tend to take on a
yeah,
really harsh tone. Late
yes,
policy is none. Do this,
yeah,
do that, no this,
yeah,
none of that, and it tends to not set up. Well, what happens if I do miss an assignment, right? How do
yeah,
I is it really like, no, I can't turn it in,
yeah,
because I don't know if that's whatever. Things are different now. And I think this is a really perfect time to think about how can we, in our syllabi, create this
yeah,
environment that supports the learner. And so rather than these harsh extremes of no late work accepted, talk to me if you miss an assignment or, creating some type of we rather than you
yes,
are
yeah,
out, that kind of really basic pronoun references, right? Like these
yeah.
things really can change the tone of a syllabus.
A- Absolutely. Yeah, syllabi are like my other office hours. They're kind of like my soapbox that I get on because syllabi set the tone. And we could do a whole series on inclusive syllabi, starting from basic things like, is it accessible? Like, are you using accessible practices? All the way up through the wording of our policies, because it all plays a part in how students are interacting with that document. And again, it's one of those moments where I could have a statement of inclusivity on my syllabus, but if the rest of it is basically screaming from that page, it doesn't matter because it's an idea that isn't executed in practice. And I agree with you 100%. Um, and a lot of times, when we have these opportunities and get invited places, I can't tell you not to use policies that your institution has approved. So I will never tell you that. I'm not telling you that. But what I am saying is, if you are able to write it yourself, if you're writing your own classroom policies, really take a look at the tone, the wording, and how it's presented. And is it best presented in a syllabus? Is another question I just have faculty think about. There are some things that are best presented in a syllabus and should be presented there. Sometimes, though, they're too big, they're too complex to get into a paragraph of text this big. And so maybe those are things that it's better to have a conversation around rather than to just put in the syllabus and say, read the syllabus on your own time. We're going to move on to this other thing. So, yeah, I think the way we present things, the way we communicate things, and I'm seeing that, yeah, that's somebody just put that in the chat. Yeah. The communication piece is critical. But yeah, inclusive syllabi, um, I just, if you have a very purposeful, meaningful, and inclusive syllabi, it does a lot of hard work for you. If you maybe don't have that, you'll be doing a lot of undoing of the syllabi because it's probably the first thing your students will see of you, especially if you've uploaded it to your learning management system. They'll see the syllabi before they'll see you and anything else you upload because they're excited. They're getting in their class. They're going to see this document and they're ready to jump in with both feet. And so they might put a little bit more weight on that document than maybe that they're doing. So we really want to make sure that those things are inclusive and are sending the message that we want to send about our classroom space. Absolutely. Yep. I see that it's 4 o'clock, and our time is precious as faculty members and educators, so I don't want to overstep my time allotment here. But I will stay on in case anybody wants to chat a little bit more, but I do want to acknowledge that it is 4 p.m. Oh, thank you all. You're so kind. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thanks for having me back. Yeah. Yay.